Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Counseling and Therapy Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdanamzalak.com. Now, today, I'm very, very excited to have on our podcast on season 3, episode number 4, a very special guest and producer, Mr. Hollywood Capone. Just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Mr. Hollywood, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan. I appreciate it. As Dr. Dan said, I'm Hollywood Capone, and there's a little bit of a story behind that name. It was more or less a nickname given to me probably 25 years ago by a fellow that I worked with for a good amount of time and wound up becoming a pretty good friend of mine to this day. And it was just one of those things. I just moved back to New Jersey from Hollywood, and I had the look. I had hair back then, and dressing the part, and he just started calling me Hollywood. And Capone, the other side of that, happens to be my wife's maiden name. And the two of them got mated together. And here I am 25 years later, and people are still calling me Hollywood Capone. In addition to that, probably about 2 years ago, I wrote my first book, and I decided to write under that name. And it's more or less become a production feature with me that I write under, I produce under, and more or less that's how I go, because the real name I was given with is this really long, ridiculous name that no one would ever remember, and it doesn't make any sense at all. So there's that. And, Dr. Dan introduced himself about, his qualifications and all that. And some of that, I think the reason that he invited me on the show is because I have some experience in some of those things with, personal loss and grief and overcoming these things in various different ways. And, the backstory, I guess, to my latest novel is the death of one of my best friends. And it was a sudden, experience for me. It's not something that I ever really anticipated. It wasn't like he was sick or anything. And it was a body blow. It hurt real bad. And the way that I got through that was inevitably writing a book about it. It wasn't really my intention. It was kind of accidental. But along that journey, it turned into a story that I took to, and I wound up writing it, and I'm very proud of it. And it helped me to kind of get through that too. It was just a coming of age thing in a lot of different ways that I didn't really want to experience, but and here we are.
So how did his passing change you or change your path in life, Mr. Hollywood?
Well, it caused me to really look at myself, because first of all, Alan was probably one of the last people on earth that knew all phases of me. He knew me from when I was a child. We met in the 5th grade, so he knew me from there on. And even people later in my life that I've met along the way, even my wife, I met my wife when I was roughly about 20, and she didn't know that first half of my life, even up to that period. So Alan was the last guy in the face of the earth that really knew all aspects of me and parts of my personality. And there was things that, we experienced as kids, that things that we won't say out loud, but he knew all the good about me, and he knew a lot of the bad about me too. And the thing that really hurt, aside from losing him, that hurt, but it was also, I lost a piece of myself there too, because there were certain times where we'd be together and maybe I'd be complaining about life or whatever, and he would give me a good look and say, "Hey, guess what? You've got a wonderful life. Do you remember where you came from?" Because he did remember where I came from. He knew all those things that were in my past that, could have led down different paths and ultimately didn't, and led me to where I am today. And part of the biggest part of why I miss him is that I miss that part of me too. There's no one else to hold that mirror up to me anymore and say, "Remember, this is who you used to be." And that's a big bummer for me.
So did you, in the past, did you take things for granted, but then with his passing, you learn not to do that anymore? Or what really other things about your personality did change after his passing or after writing this book?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if it's so much that, but it's when I did take things for granted in the past, he was a he would shine a light on it. He would say, "Hey, hold on a minute here. Do you remember this?" And he gave me perspective. He gave me he leveled me out sometimes when I'm looking at things thinking they're way more intense or way worse than they are. And sometimes he would even if it was on the phone or a text message or something, he's like, "Look, you've been through far worse than this. Remember X, Y, and Z," and it just kind of helped me, bring me back to reality. And I miss the fact that that's gone. It's not like I'm 55 years old now. I'm a mature adult, and I have a pretty level head and decent perspective on the world. It's just there's this little piece of that history that's gone forever, and I'm gonna miss it forever.
So now that this voice of or your friend when he was there and he was basically bringing you into looking things with different perspective, now that he's no longer here, how do you adapt or how do you cope with not him being there? Do you talk to him in your subconscious mind? How do you cope with the loss?
Well, I think in my situation it's a little bit different because, like I said, I wrote a book about his passing, and that helped me get through that because it was a tough time for me. It was sudden and unexpected, and I went from one day talking to him about what we're doing for the weekend, and the next day I'm visiting him in the hospital on what would ultimately be his deathbed. But as for right now, I say this to anybody that asks me that. Alan gave me one of the greatest gifts anyone's ever given me, and he gave me the motivation to write that story about him. And subsequently, since I published that book, I started writing another one, which I'm very deep into. And this might sound, gratuitous or self-serving, but I brought him back in the next book. And I did that for a couple different reasons. First, the most important reason is that he's an interesting character. He always was. From the day that I met him in the fifth grade, he was just this interesting guy, very bright, but not too bright. I don't know if that makes sense. He was not too bright enough to go out and do wild things and have fun, but he was a successful lawyer, and he made his way through life by being very clever and almost borderline brilliant. And so as a character, I brought him back in the book because of that, because he's just so bright and he was just such an interesting guy. And the other side of it is I just wanted to spend a little bit more time with him, and I get to do that in the book as we write the story and see where it evolves to.
Are they more fictional stories, Mr. Hollywood, or things actually did happen to him in that book?
Well, in the first book, it's fiction and nonfiction combined. I go over my visits in the hospital and his ultimate death, but then on the backstory of that is I tell a different story about his demise and how he was consumed by this giant snake of fire, and that obviously is fiction. And in the second book, I bring him back as a fictional character, but there's little nuances about how he is and how he was, and certain things that he and I did together that I kind of just dabble in there because they're interesting and they read well. And so that's what we're doing with the second one.
So do you feel that all the subsequent book are going to have a part of him? So by you keeping him in every of the stories, you're basically keeping him alive in your memory.
Oh yeah, and that's intentional too. I want to keep him around. I miss him terribly. He was one of these guys where I would get a text at 4:30 in the morning. Now I get up early, but I don't get up at 4:30. And, my phone would be going off at 4:30. I roll over and look at it and be some ridiculous text from my friend. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I would curse him at 4:30 in the morning, like, what are you doing sending me this? But now I kind of wish I was getting those texts at 4:30.
Yes, so these are the moments that you miss the most.
Okay.
So now when it comes to the writing part, is it something that comes easy to you, or do you really have to be imaginative? You have to be creative in that writing? Because again, if you mix fiction and nonfiction, the fiction part is creative. So how do you mix both of them by swapping stories that are not really, they didn't really exist, so you have to create them and mix them into the story?
Well, the first book was, I don't want to say it was easy because it wasn't easy, but practically wrote itself. I sat down in front of the computer, and it was just a stream of consciousness. And it all worked because of who he was, and the situation in hand, and the way that I perceived it from my distance, looking onward. But the second book is a little bit more, I don't want to say difficult, because it's not really difficult, but it's a little more complex. There's more characters in it. The story's a bit more complex. And I have these peaks and valleys where I'll get up on this peak and I'll catch onto a thought and I'll write it. And, 5,000 words will go without me even batting an eye. And then sometimes I'll get into these phases where, the story, it's there, but I'm kind of just grinding my way through it, just trying to get to where I want to be with it. So I don't want to say it's difficult, because it's not really difficult, but it's more, what's the word? Not even laborious, but it's just, it's more of a challenge in the fact that, writing the story is, it's full of these peaks and valleys, and while writing it, I don't want it to seem gratuitous. So sometimes I'll write a bit and I'll take a step back and I'll look at it and I'll say, maybe that's not 100% the way I want to go with it. But then sometimes I'm on it and it's just bam, 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 and it goes by the numbers, and it's really not much more than me, again, just doing stream of consciousness.
When it comes to the book cover and everything else, did you create it yourself, or you had to get a designer to be able to really understand your story and put it into an image?
I designed it myself initially, but then when I was submitting it for publication, obviously it had to be formatted in a certain way. So some of the things had to change. So I hired out to get those last few subtleties changed in a way where they would fit, the paperback design and the fonts for the text and the formatting, because I also formatted it for Kindle too. So if anybody buys the book, it formats seamlessly with Kindle. And then eventually I even decided to do an audiobook version of it, which was, that was something that I thought was going to be this easy. I figured, I'll just read it out loud and I'll sell lots of books and everything will be great. And it was the opposite of that. It was a 9-month slog with me in front of the computer recording this daily, to the point where finally I started to like what I was hearing. It took so long. It was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Wow. So what do you wish that this book brings to the general public? Do you want it to be helping people going through grievance? Do you want it to be people that are actually go through grievance, but they're reading the book and they're saying, wow, this is something that I've experienced myself, or I could feel his pain, I could feel this. What exactly do you want this book to accomplish?
Good question. And that's easily answered. What I want this book to, if anybody reads this book, what I want them to take away from it is that these people that are around us, our family, our friends, these people that we see every day, that we may very well take for granted, and not intentionally. It's just that that's how life works. You go to work every day, you do your thing, you have your obligations to fulfill, and you get involved in that. And sometimes we miss these people that are close to us. We don't tell them that we love them as often as we should, or ever. And we don't tell them how much we mean to us. And then one day you look and they're gone by surprise. Mm-hmm. And that's really the point that I'm trying to make with the book, is that these people that are around you, that you care about and that care about you, as a person, I think that it should be said out loud from time to time. Just because tomorrow isn't guaranteed, and it might not be what you think it'll be.
Now, in your career, Mr. Hollywood, did anything change besides just being now a writer and focusing a lot on that? Did you continue doing production, and how did that go for you?
I guess about 12 or 13 years ago, I wound up, again, another accident, being a pro-level photographer. Okay. Started shooting weddings and doing headshots for actors and portrait work and things like that. And as an aside, not to keep talking about Alan, but in 2001, I lost my sister. And that was a big deal for me too. And I wasn't really in a position to write anything about it. It's not the thing that ever occurred to me. It was just it was a terrible time. And there was a lot that happened after that didn't really go well for me. I started drinking a lot, and it was just one of those ways to numb the pain, you know. And on the tail end of that whole cycle, when I began to get away from that and drag myself out of that funk, I wound up starting to shoot weddings, and it was just a different path that took me in my life. It got me out of the day-to-day routine of what I had become accustomed to, and took me down a different road, and a road that I'm very grateful that I turned onto.
And when it comes now, you said you live in New Jersey. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and are you still continuing doing head photography, or are you now focusing primarily on writing books?
I'm focused on writing, but I do a lot of photography, and I do it both for pay, and I do it for me. My wife and I travel a lot to California, and California, I love shooting out there. There's just so much beauty out there that it's almost like I don't really have to do much except point the camera in the right direction, and not just so much beauty of, you know, landscapes and people, but it's things happening. There's always things happening out there that I can take an image of and make something out of it, because it's just, for me, it's an interesting place. I mean, I've been around New York for the majority of my life, and there's lots of cool things out here too. It's just that sometimes it's off my radar, and I don't see it as easily as I see stuff on the other coast. But I did. My father's older, and he had a heart attack a few years ago, survived it. But after that, I started taking pictures of him in his shop, and he has some old cars. So I started taking some pictures of him with the old cars. And a friend of mine said, "Why don't you do a coffee table book about that?" So that's something on another burner for me.
Wow.
That's also therapeutic, because, you know, he's in his, you know, older years, and I want to do something that kind of represents that.
That would be awesome. At least we give him as a gift, especially with the things that he's passionate about, which is cars. For you, beside the passion of writing and photography, have you developed any other passion besides that?
Oh yeah, many. My wife calls me Superman, because I have so many things going on at once, and somehow I managed to navigate my way through those. You know, I've been a musician for decades, since I was probably 15, and writing poetry and writing songs and things like that. And to this day, I still have a rock band that I play with, you know, a few times a month. That it's not on a, you know, serious level, but it's something that I do, and we do, just as a release. It's just one of those things. I mean, everybody's got hobbies. You know, some people collect stamps, some people, walk the sand with the metal detector, and that's all great. But me and my friends, we get together and we play Chili Peppers tunes and Led Zeppelin and stuff like that. So it's kind of,
Now, the fact that, because you know how many people that were so important in your life that you've lost throughout the years, have you ever thought about helping people go through grievance, because you have the experience in that field? So do you, when people read your book, they kind of try to contact you and say, "Hey, I'm going through the same. What should I do to cope with this, or to cope with the loss?" So have you ever come across the situation, Mr. Hollywood?
I have from time to time, and not relative to the book, but you know, and this, I think, has something more to do with age than anything else. Is as we get older, these things happen more and more often, and it's just a part of life. I think it's what makes life so precious, because once we experience loss, then we start to have a newfound appreciation for life itself and how wonderful it is and can be. And so, in my travels, I've had experience, people that I know and things that have suffered terrible losses, and I'm always incredibly empathetic about that. It brings tears to my eyes. I've been a pallbearer for, people that, maybe I wasn't really that close to, but to the other people in the family I was close to. And, you're in that situation, you just see the grief and the heartache, and it makes you want to do anything you can to help relieve that pain. And the truth is, the only thing that really relieves that pain is time. And so, as a person, when I see these things happen, not in my immediate sphere, but close enough where it matters, I try and be there for whoever it's affected in whatever way I can.
Spiritually speaking, Mr. Hollywood, have you adopted like other practices that kind of like are able to appease your stress if whenever you go through this, like meditation or anything of that sort? Have you gone into doing this, especially when you're going through the loss itself?
Well, of course. I mean, it's you know, I like to say that I believe in, a God or a higher power, but I was raised a Catholic. But the truth for me is I don't really, you know, I don't subscribe to the pomp and circumstance of it all. But I believe that there's some sort of spiritual awareness out there. I believe that there's a reason that we are here, and whenever whenever things are incredibly difficult for me, when the chips are down, when I don't have an answer, I was taught to pray at an early age, and I don't pray like in the standardized, this is what you say, blah blah blah, whatever it is. Somebody told me a long time ago, is that if you're going to pray, you ask for strength, because that is the only thing you will get when you pray and ask for it. And I have found that to be absolutely true. If the chips are down, or I'm trying to find some inner peace within me, when I pray, when I, ask for help from above or wherever it comes from, the only thing I ask for is strength, because every single time I've asked for that strength, whether it's strength to persevere or strength to endure or whatever the situation is, I've always gotten that. But if you pray for, oh, I want a better job, or I want to make more money, these things they're unattainable in that regard. You can pray for the strength to help yourself achieve those things, but you can't pray and ask for goods, because they won't come.
I see. Now, how can people find your book, Mr. Hollywood? Can they buy them like on Amazon? Can they buy them
Sure.
publisher? How do they can access your information?
My information, I'm on Instagram as Hollywood Capone. And the book is available on Amazon. It's called The Ashes by Hollywood Capone. It's also available as an audiobook on Audible. On Amazon, it's available as a paperback and also a Kindle format for download.
So if, let's say, for our listeners, what would be the best piece of advice that you would give them, those who are actually going through grieving right now, especially after the loss of some of their loved one during this pandemic? I'm sure that some people have gone through this issue. What would be the best piece of advice that you would give them for them to be able to cope through the holidays?
Well, the first thing I would say is that you're not alone. You're just not alone. And the second piece of advice I would give in relation to that is talk to somebody, talk to anybody, talk to people close to you, talk to your friends, and if they kind of don't feel the same way, keep talking to people, because the more you talk about it, the more that angst and that ugliness will be released, and it won't happen immediately, but if you stick to it and you keep believing that tomorrow will be better, and the next day will be a little bit better than that, and the next day will be a little bit better than that, then eventually that pain will never ever go away, but you'll get through it enough where you can manage and then look back retrospectively and hopefully find some peace in it. But you have to talk about it, whether it's to friends and family, or even if it's to someone that doesn't really know you that well, but will give you an ear. You have to say the words, because much like writing my book, I wrote my book. I just started typing out things just to tell myself what it was that I was feeling. And in a way, it was much like saying it out loud to someone else, only I chose to say it to, quite a few more people in the form of typing it out. But it's basically the same thing. If you're going through that process and you're hurting more than you could possibly describe, you need to say it out loud, and you need to talk to somebody about it.
So it's like, in a way, you writing the book, it was like journaling. You journaled your emotions, your feeling of a loss, and that you put into a book. So this sometimes is always good to be able to, so those who could not express themselves, another alternative is to write down their emotions. And like this, they could reread them and start understanding where the loss is coming from. Obviously, in a physical world, we understand that, but in a spiritual world. So obviously, this is a way for them to be able to adapt. And as you said, with time, it doesn't mean that the pain will disappear, but it will dissipate. It will get to be more easier to cope with the loss of that person.
That's absolutely 100% true.
Good, good, good. Well, Mr. Hollywood Capone, that is all the time that we have for today's episode. I really do appreciate your time for taking out of your very busy schedule to join us on this podcast. Now, thank you for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story and your losses. Now, we hope that you have all enjoyed today's episode, and I'm very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 3 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you're listening to today. Now, here are a few concluding words of wisdom. Work hard for what you want because it won't come to you without a fight. You have to be strong and courageous and know that you can do anything you put your mind into. If somebody puts you down or criticize you, just keep on believing in yourself and turn it out into something positive. Naysayers will always have something negative to say about you and what you do, but are their words just a simple projection of their own insecurities? Your courage to move forward has nothing to do with their hesitation of doing something positive in their own lives. You know what you're worth, so go out there and reach all the dreams you set yourself to reach. You are in full control of your destiny, as it hasn't been written yet. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life. And happy holidays.